2 days ago, the Finance Minister, Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta, presented a mid-year review of the 2017 budget in Parliament and concluded that the economy is on the right path of recovery and well positioned to enable the government to implement its programs. While many agree with him, others contend that the government could have done better. Now, do these figures presented by the Finance Minister signify better days ahead, or they are just a cosmetic makeup over a weak economic structure? To discuss these and more, I have with me Dr. Osei-Assibey, Senior Lecturer in the Economics Department, University of Ghana, and an Adjunct Fellow of the Institute of Economic Affairs. And you are watching The Hard Truth. My name is Nana Akusi-Akunira-Santi-Samuels. Senior Lecturer, Economics Department, University of Ghana, Dr. Osei-Assibey is in our studio. Welcome to The Hard Truth, Eric.
Thank you very
How
much.
are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, the budget guy, you're so busy now.
Well, I don't know. But I mean, we are all helping to shape the future of this country.
Good. But how is the Economics Department doing?
We are doing well.
Good.
Yeah, we are keeping on.
Okay.
Keeping on.
You're keeping on?
Yeah.
Good. Now, the mid-year budget review has been presented by the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta. He emphasized that the macroeconomics indicators show that our economy is on the right path of recovery and that investor confidence has been restored. I mean, how do you see it? Do you think it is a fact?
Well, if the numbers and the trends are anything to go by, then we can say that yes, these are facts. You could clearly see that we've made some significant progress. I mean, all the macroeconomic indicators appear to be trending in the right direction. You look at inflation. Inflation has been trending downward. The last time we ended the year with 15.4, and as we speak, it's 12.1%. That is good. You look at interest rates, treasury bill rates, which was already coming down. It came to about 16.7% by the end of the year. It's currently around 11.9.
So what did he give us a clear picture? I mean, from what he said.
So I mean, for macroeconomy, often there are certain indicators that will tell you whether your economy is doing well or not. That is at the aggregate level. So at the aggregate level, first you need to look at how these indicators are performing. And so you look at exchange rate. Exchange rate has remained a little stable, relatively stable compared to the same time last year. What else? You look at growth, right? Economic growth, which is the base, the productive base of the economy. The first quarter data that the Ghana Statistical Service put out actually showed that the country grew by about 6.6%. Of course, we are yet to see the second quarter, which for me will be very significant because that is really when the MPP government actually took hold of the economy. The first quarter, they hadn't really settled well. So most of the budget was read in March, and so most of the effect of the policies and initiative would really reflect in the first and the second quarter. I'm wondering,
on what fact did the Finance Minister say all of that? Investor confidence has been restored, things are moving on well. Why did he say that? So
in that case, you perhaps have to maybe look at investment inflows. If you look at GIPC, you're comparing the extent to which investments are responding to some of the reforms and policy changes compared to the previous year, and if you can see a clear up or difference, then you may say that yes, confidence level is being restored. The Bank of Ghana also said that Bank of Ghana conducts periodic market research, confidence levels of executives, marketers, and economists, how they see the economy, and it looks like that also have improved. So on that score, we can say that yes, the economy appears to be on track, but there's still some downside risk.
Right. Some will say, well, he's saying things are improving, but it's not reflecting in our pocket. What would you say to that?
Well, as for that, I mean, you will not see, it is not tangible for you to see that, I mean, some money should come to your pocket. But the mere fact that you don't wake up thinking about the fact that you go to the market and prices have changed, you know, that you
Is
don't really
is it so
thinking about,
significant? I mean, how significant is the change in the market prices?
Yeah, it is, because it's adding more in terms of your purchasing power. You know, if for example milk is 3 cedis, you know, at the beginning of the year, and still remains 3 cedis, you know, it is good. If it's now gone up to 3 cedis 50 pesos, then you are worse off. Yeah, you know, because your same 3 cedis at the beginning of the year could no longer buy you a milk. So if you can still buy milk at the same price, then it tells you that that is good. You know, means that the rate at which prices are increasing, you know, had slowed considerably. So, but that will not mean that money really coming to your pocket. The other way that maybe people may say, well, has it really generated enough jobs? Because that is where you see direct income coming to your pocket.
Because investors are coming in.
Yeah, the money that comes in. That one we are yet to see, you know, because I mean, most of the government policies, the one district, one factory, and the industrialization, IPEP policies, and all of that, many of them have not taken off, even as we speak.
So as to this point, what are some of the loopholes that, you know, you have identified in the review that, you know, the government will have to take a second look at?
Yes, I think few things, particularly with regard to the fiscal. You know, we are talking about closing the fiscal gap. In fact, the government has reviewed the budget deficit from 6.5 to 6.3, which is good because it's consolidating. You know, you are reducing the gap, which has an implication for your debt stock and all of that. I'm sure we'll talk about that. So that has been done. But why did government do that? You know, the main reason why government closed that gap or reduced the fiscal deficit is because revenue is underperforming. We are not doing that well in regard to revenue. If you look at the budget that was read in March this year, government projection was to increase revenue by 33%. And it was largely going to come from corporate taxes and then import duties, trade taxes. But all of these have underperformed woefully. So what that means is that your expenditure, you know, you have budgeted to spend certain amount. You may not be able to spend that amount. So prudency requires that you have to reduce your expenditure to match your revenue.
Do we see that happening?
And that is one good thing that I've seen about this budget, that government trying to align its expenditure with the revenue collection. And even in doing that, it has even reduced the expenditure even more than the revenue shortfall. And that is why the gap is now closing from 6.5 to 6.3. But there is also an effect, you know, on the economy, because however that we want to see it, although it is good, it's prudent, it means that government is committed to fiscal discipline, because in the past, what we have seen is that even at times where revenues are not doing well, that is when government keeps spending. You know, and when you do that, you widen the gap, you enlarge the gap, the gap between your revenue and your expenditure, and that causes huge problem of you having to borrow so much to finance that gap. This time around, government is saying that no, we will only spend what we are getting. So if revenue is not coming in, then we must also reduce our expenditure. It is good, that is prudent, that is all what we have been talking about. But there's a flip side to that, because expenditure, we all know, is a key driver of growth. You know, you look at, so which areas are government cutting in terms of expenditure? Government says it's cutting 0.3% of GDP of goods and services.
Yeah.
It's cutting 0.3% of GDP of statutory funds. And it's also, that's 0.4% of goods and services, 0.3% of statutory, and 0.3% of capital expenditures, right, CAPEX. So most of these are growth-enhancing expenditures, especially infrastructure, you know. So what that means is that that can have negative effect on your growth projections. So although it is prudent, it could have some negative impact on your ability to expand the economy, because if the MDAs are not spending on their investments and their activities, it tends to kind of slow down the economic activity in the economy. And if you are not spending on infrastructure like roads, like hospitals and schools infrastructure and all the other things, then you're also not creating jobs for the people. So
right.
That could, may not necessarily, but it could dampen your growth. Although you would have achieved fiscal consolidation, you would have done that at a cost to the expansion of the economy.
What of this? The minority also feels that the figures presented by the minister are cosmetic, they call it, and the government is accumulating arrears and failing to pay contractors. Could this be the case?
Yes. I mean, government is saying that it's auditing these arrears. The arrears to the tune of about 7 billion, Ghana cedis, and some of which government believe that they were unwarranted. The due diligence were not done on them. So government is actually looking into that. Now, so it's an issue of balancing value for money, and also growing the economy. You understand? Because when these arrears are not paid, it has a double effect on the economy. One, you are depriving the
does
banking.
that make it cosmetic, or the minority are just being minority because
it's just that government is trying to be prudent. You will not just come and take anything like that on. You want to take your time, and this is the time that the economy is really under serious stress. In terms of finance, whatever was left behind, there was nothing, and so government is taking its time, and I believe what government is doing. Because you cannot just also come in and start spending, particularly when you have recorded a budget deficit of about close to 10% in just the year gone by. Huge budget deficit, which had put a lot of things out of place. Off-budget expenditures and the expenditures that were not approved and all of that. And so you need to take your time to try to stabilize things, to try to get your finances well in order, achieve macroeconomic stability, then you begin to think about how to grow the economy. So for me, I'm all for that, but we just have to prepare ourselves, knowing that since we are trending this course, it definitely is going to mean that we need to sacrifice a little more. Arrears, it's important that government pays the arrears as soon as possible for those that are genuinely contracted, because it's also depriving the economy, particularly the banking sector, the needed liquidity. And also these contractors, they need this money to invest in the economy or to hire people to do works and all of that. And so when they don't get their money, they also don't work. And it slows, economic activity. And all of that can come back to help the economy, So much as government wants to look into it, I think the process has to be expedited so that those that deserve whatever contract that they get these monies back and put it back into the economy, because it's going to help the government itself. Otherwise, I think what government is doing is right. It couldn't have just gone ahead and even the monies were not there.
During the maiden national policy statement summit this year, you have quoted to have said that no matter how well the macroeconomic setup is improved, we have a weak productive structure that drags the ability of the productive sector to produce more to increase exports and trade. Then it's not going to be sustainable. That was what you said. In your view, has it reflected significantly in the productive structure of the economy? Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I always have the view that whatever macroeconomic stability that we achieve, if we do not have our productive base expanding, it is not going to be sustainable. That's the gospel truth, because if you can achieve fiscal deficit, gap, you can bring it down, but if the economy is not growing for you to generate more revenue, you have to keep borrowing and adding to your debt stock and adding to your interest costs and all of that come back to increase your expenditures without necessarily increasing your infrastructure and all of that. And so the good thing about the present budget, is about the government trying to balance the two, because this is one of the budget that you could see a very deliberate policies towards the real sector of the economy, like policies that geared towards bringing in investments that would invest in the productive sectors of the economy. One district, one factory. Assuming all the districts are able to get factories, what is that going to mean? It means that we're going to expand our productive base. Some of them are going to export, and bring in more revenue, foreign currency, which is more sustainable other than borrowing and all of that to show up our currency. And these businesses along the value chain are going to employ people from the productive to the transportation to the harbor and all of that. And so that is good, not only looking at the demand-driven policies, looking at the fiscal consolidation, how to cut interest rate, how to tighten monetary policy, all of that for me, they are just cosmetic, they are just short-time, gains. But in the long term, is to making sure that your agricultural sector is working and much more efficiently, making sure that your manufacturing sector is expanding, is employing people, is producing at competitively rate and is exporting, These are the things that will sustain the economy. And so the budget appears to reflect that, kind of feeling. But the problem is, how is the private sector going to respond? Because that is key, because all the initiatives are going to be driven by the private sector. So which means that you not just only put out the policies and the framework, but you must also make sure that the business enabling environment is conducive, that will make it attractive enough for the private sector to put its money,
Right.
And so it's a combination of things that have to be
We'll
done.
be right back. Welcome back to The Hard Truth, and I still have Dr. Osei-Assibey, the Senior Lecturer Economics Department at the University of Ghana. He's still in our studio. Eric, prior to the presentation of the budget, in March, many people expected the government to outline strategies to improve revenue mobilization to finance its numerous campaign promises. Yet the budget was a bit, steady on tax cuts. The media review, also showed that government fell below its revenue target by, I think, 14.9%. Do you think the government lacks a clear strategy to boost revenue?
This is very interesting. Well, I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it, Revenue generation often shouldn't only be the level of taxes, but it should be about the tax base and then the yield that it brings in, I think government focus now is not to increase the tax rates, but rather to ensure compliance, reduce avoidance and evasion within the tax system, closing the loopholes, plugging it, reducing corruption and ensuring tax administrative efficiency and all of that, that is also a way.
Right, but can that alone,
yes,
reduce
so
taxes alone?
It's a way to,
right,
of course, making sure that you increase the tax yield, you bring in more, without necessarily increasing the tax rates. But some of those measures, takes a little bit of time. Tax compliance, putting together regulations and legislations to making sure that people comply and all of that, plugging the loopholes and all of that would take a little bit of time. And so that's one, we may not see that, in a immediate sense. And also government saying that, okay, we're looking at shifting away from taxation to production. And the essence is that if you are able to, if you are taxing somebody 10% and the person is producing 20, what do you get? You get 2. But if you are taxing someone 10% and the person is producing 40, you get what? 4. You understand?
Yeah.
So the issue is, why not help that person to increase the production, so that whatever tax, however small that it is, the yield will be more to you. That is great. But here again, that also will take time. So in the interim, we're definitely going to have these kind of shortfalls. But of course, it's not as if the idea is not good. The idea is good. But I also want to see government, in addition to that, being more innovative in terms of bringing in more people into the tax brackets. It is important, particularly where government is rolling out a lot of social intervention policies, like the free senior high school,
You'll
paying,
come to that, yeah.
allowances and all of that. Then you and also talking about the fact that you're going to reduce debt, not going to borrow as much as you used to do, and also shifting away from aid, that Ghana beyond aid, which means that you're no longer going to depend so much on development partners to, close your budget gap and all of that. What that means is that you really have to look within, to mobilize a lot more revenue, to be able to finance all these projects.
To resort to borrowing?
Sorry?
So you have to resort to borrowing?
No, not borrowing, because you say you are shifting away from borrowing because your debt stock is already high. We are in the high risk debt distress, That is what IMF has described that. So you have to find a way of bringing that down. And so you need to look within to mobilize the resources. So that means that you have to think a bit beyond the box and see the informal sector. We've always been talking about, the informal sector not paying tax, because you look at the informal sector, it's huge.
Wide, yeah.
It's very huge. About 87% of our workforce work within that sector. And most of them...
But won't it be difficult bringing all of them on board to make them taxpayers?
Yeah, however small, I've always said that there's always a mechanism to which you can do that. It doesn't have to be big. If everyone is paying 1 cedi, a day from whatever work that is doing on the street or whatever, and is paying 1 cedi, because you could imagine how much that will do, But often the argument is that it is even more costly to collect than what you get.
But again, it brings us to the leakages. Did you believe that government is doing enough to plug in the leakages in the revenue in the system?
Well, we are yet to see. I know some things are being done, particularly with the exemptions regime that have changed. I mean, now when you are bringing in any good, you need to get approval from the Ministry of Finance, whether you qualify or not, But I think we still have to do more, particularly at the harbors. Many of the bottlenecks and the middlemen and people, the customs taking that and all of that are still present. Of course, you don't expect people to overnight change to become angels. Obviously it will take a bit more time, and it will also mean that you put in place you strengthen the institutions, that makes it difficult, for anybody to try to, take government money or whatever. The costs for doing that should be huge. There should be sanctions, and it should be, it should be deterrent enough to make it much more costly for you to go into such an act. And it has to be now, because that is the only way government can finance most of the things that he's saying. Otherwise, it's really going to be difficult. You can have the will, the wish, but if the monies are not coming, there's always very little you can do.
What of expenditure? Revenue is not performing, it's really affecting expenditure. Total public expenditure, I think for this year have been revised downwards to about 2.2 billion Ghana cedis. The government has a lot of socio-economic development programs to implement. You can talk of, we talked about the SHS, talk about one district, one factory, 1 million per constituency, planting of foods and all of that. What do you see happening to the implementation of these programs?
Yes, the only thing is government can do expenditure switching, reducing discretionary expenditures, and making sure that certain key programs are protected. But when you can do that and still ring fence some of these programs, because these are your flagship programs, you know, you campaign heavily on them. And so you make sure that no matter be the case, these ones are not going to be touched. The implication of that is you may have to trade off certain expenditures that would also help the economy, particularly infrastructure, capital expenditures, you know, and also introduce much more rigidity. Here we are trying to reduce the rigidity within the inflexibility within our budget system. That is why government reduced the statutory payments, you know, from about 35 to 25, cap it to 25%, so that it frees out more money for government to increase discretionary expenditures and all of that. Now, when you bring in most of these social policies, you know, and these social policies like free senior high school, there's no way you can say that this year or we don't have money, so kids will not go to school. You need to get the money. So if the money is coming, that will be your priority, even before you pay salaries. Otherwise, there's going to be chaos. You know, so you have to ring-fence that kind of money, earmark it for such purpose. And so what then will be left will be small for other things. So that is why it is very important that you make sure that your revenue base is widened and you are able to bring in more money. Otherwise, it's really going to affect many of these fine projects that government is talking about. Of course, the other thing that I also like is about government intention to have what is calling the non-debt infrastructure financing, leveraging our natural resources to bring in private partners, you know, to invest in roads and other things. It's a brilliant idea, very noble idea, but it may take a little bit time, you know, for you to do the feasibility studies and all of that, you know, to get it done. So the one of the greatest threats to all the policies that, you know, are in the budget, that I think that some of them are brilliant. We've never seen most of it in the budgets that have been read in this country, is revenue mobilization. If we don't get it right, all these fine programs are just going to happen. Yeah.
Again, in your view, do you see the government's decision not to go for a supplementary budget as a step in the right direction, looking at the constraints it's facing?
Yes, I think it was okay. It means that government is ready to sacrifice, not bent on getting every budgeted expenditure through, particularly when you are not doing too well in terms of revenue. You know, so what you need to do in this instance is for you to cut your expenditure. The cutting of expenditure, I'm not against it, because that's the prudent way to do. But there's another way of you not meeting those other things that you're supposed to do. But at this stage where you are not making the revenue and you also want to reduce your borrowing, the best thing to do is to cut the expenditure. But it doesn't have to continue like that, because it has negative impact on the economy. So you need to, while cutting that expenditure, you have to make sure that in the next period, you rope in much more money. You're able to generate much more revenue, so that you don't have to keep cutting the expenditures. Otherwise, the targets, the program targets, and all the manifesto promise will not be realized. You know, so achieve macroeconomic stability first, which government is doing, which I'm happy about. But beyond that, the economy has to grow. People have to get jobs to do. You know, income levels have to increase, and all of them. That will mean government stimulus spending to stimulate the economy. So it's critical that revenue comes in.
Eric, when the government indicated in the 2017 budget statement that it had, I think, fiscal deficit targeted at 6.5%, many expressed doubt about its ability to actually meet this target by the end of the year. Now, the target has been further revised down to 6.3% of GDP, drawing from the budget review and looking at the economic viabilities and projections. Do you think that its targets, you know, the government can really achieve? Can the government achieve that?
Well, if government wants to achieve it, it can't achieve it. You know, like I said, if you want to achieve it, You just have to stop spending. And
can we stop spending?
Yes. So
can
you
we
just
stop
have to
spending?
stop spending and then just achieve it. But you may have done, worst into the economy. So it's not going to be easy looking at the numbers, particularly looking at where the revenue is going to come from. Government has tried to revise the CIP, the corporate income tax, and also the trade taxes, import levies and import duties and all of that, but not as that significant. And these taxes, these two very taxes, are taxes that are very volatile. If you look at the tax trend, import duties are very volatile because you cannot control it. In many countries are today shifting away from trade taxes because of the volatile nature of it. You cannot really plan with it because it depends on so many factors. Your people out there, how they are doing, the economies of where they are, and whether they are willing to bring cars home and all of that. So it's a lot, and it's closely attached to your own performance, whether people are able to import cars, whether they have the necessary foreign currencies and all of that. So it's something that you cannot really predict. And the government actually projected it to be about 66%, to increase by 66%. Now, what government was expecting is by making sure that exemptions are reduced and plugging the loopholes and others, they will be able to get that. But it's not happening that way. The volumes of imports have reduced, and the factors that actually led to this reduction still remain. So I wouldn't say that it's going to be easy for government, but it's still achievable. I mean, the last part of the year, now that, the government read a budget in March, and came out with a lot of tax cuts and tax realignments and all of that. Economic automatic adjustment takes a little bit of time, for the economy begin to assimilate some of the taxes and respond to them. The VAT that have been reduced to 3% and all of that, it will take a bit of time. So getting to the latter part, the first 2 quarters, often that is when government revenue really goes up. So we are yet to see how the market is going to respond to these numerous tax changes. And if they respond positively, then it's going to be achievable. But with regard to expenditure, I can tell you that government is really committed to making sure that it doesn't overspend. I
see, but government again is planning to amend the Public Financial Management Act to limit fiscal deficit within the range of 3 to 5% of GDP for every financial year. This amendment, it's becoming a reality considering the behavior of subsequent governments over the years. You see it being effective in terms of implementation?
Yes, I was happy when I heard it because some of us have been trumpeting that for a long time, that there's a need for us to have some kind of fiscal rules, some kind of fiscal responsibility that will tie the hands of government, not to be frivolous in terms of its expenditure. Because, I mean, come to think of it, this stability, particularly in the first year of elected government, is not too new. We've seen that several times. We saw that in Kufuor times when Kufuor took over. There was relative stability. When Atta Mills took over 2011, from 2010 to 2011, we recorded stable economy. So we've seen it over and over. But often when it's getting to the tail end of the administration, political administration, that is when really you will see incumbent parties or elected government's tendency to spend, either to seek for re-election, spending off budget, spending without approval. That fiscal illusion has been with us for a long time, So it is all because of lack of institutions, monitoring and enforcement institutions that tie the hands of government, that even where you are getting to the election year, you do not have the leeway to just spend. So when you have Fiscal Responsibility Act in place, that clearly tells you that you cannot spend between 3 to 5%. Then, of course, it gives some numerical values, to the rule. So everyone is being guided that you cannot exceed. But it should go beyond that. And in going beyond that, two things have to happen. One, it shouldn't just be having numerical targets that you're committing government to. There should be sanctions in addition to that, so that where government exceeds that target, government is punished for that. In other jurisdictions, like in US in 2007, they introduced this Fiscal Responsibility Act. And one of the sanctions were that for every budget deficit that the government runs, Congress was going to get a reduction in pay. You know, so every... No,
but bringing it down here, would that work?
Well, I mean, so it depends on what will work for us. You know, so you tax government that anytime you exceed, you say 5%, you put in a cap 5%. If you exceed that, all government ministers will have a pay cut. You get punished for it.
That'll be interesting. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Hard Truth. Dr. Osei-Assibey is a...
Osei-Assibey.
Osei-Assibey. Is it a compound name?
Yeah, it's a compound name.
Okay, so he says it's a compound name. I take it back. So Dr. Osei-Assibey is a senior lecturer at the Economics Department, University of Ghana. He's still here. Eric, the gross... no, you wanted to add something before we go on. Yes, kindly do.
So the Fiscal Responsibility Act by itself may not be that effective if some other... institutions are not available. One of them is having a fiscal council, independent fiscal council, and the role of that council is to monitor and ensure enforcement. You know, and so I was very happy when I saw that within the manifesto of the MPP, they put that in, that they're going to have independent fiscal council and fiscal responsibility.
And who is overseeing that?
So that is yet to be done, but you could see that, well, Dr. Bawumia is very passionate about that. So now he has come out with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is yet to go to Parliament. But I'm also advising that we have to also make sure that the independent fiscal council.
So I asked that who is going to make sure things? I mean, they are going to be from government?
No, it has to be an independent governance institutions. You know,
appointed by
an independent-minded person.
Like who?
Well, I don't know. An independent is committed to fiscal discipline and can castigate government, you know, advise government, look at whether government forecasts.
Who is setting it up? Is it the government setting it up?
Well, government will have to set it up.
And then government will have a say?
Have the say or who becomes, but it depends on the person. Whoever that is taken, you have an integrity, right? It happens everywhere.
But don't all these people in positions have integrity?
It's just like in easy.
Right.
No matter how you want to see it, there's no way you can have complete independence where somebody else chooses the Electoral Commission. It has to be done by government. Just like Bank of Ghana, which is supposed to be an independent body. We have several independent governance institutions that are all elected by government, but they are supposed to be independent. So government can proceed in that same way, set it up, making sure that whoever is put there is very independent. For example, when government made a projection of a revenue to increase by 33%, if you have a fiscal independent council in place, it would point to government that looking at the assumptions and the underlying factors, we think that the 33% is not likely, and bring it down to what is more likely in that sense. So that is the work of the Independent Fiscal Council, keeping government in line, making sure that all organs of government are committing to the set rules. And I think it's very important, and I will be very pleased if I see government pushing ahead with such an institution. That is when we'll be sure that whether we are in election year or not, politicians will keep to the rule. Otherwise, if you still leave it to them, now there is no much political pressure, so you can achieve this stability. But where it matters most, when you are getting close to elections, then you need to provide your constituencies and others are put. Now, you said you do down here, you say you do this here, you haven't done it. The time is getting, if you don't come and do it, we are not going to vote. That is where the pressure comes. And if you don't take care, you will yield.
The gross public debt stop increased from, I think, 1.2 22.3 billion Ghana cedis at the end of 2016. That was a provisional figure of, I think, about 135 or 138.5 billion Ghana cedis at the end of June. Now, this denotes an increment of about 16.2 billion cedis within 6 months. Is this a healthy trend? And what are your expectations of government, in relation to borrowing?
Yes, I think honestly that government had done well thus far, because the
government has what, done well?
It has done well.
I see.
Yeah.
16.2.
Yeah, because you are looking at the rate of
6
accumulation.
months?
Rate of accumulation.
And the year is not yet, 6 months.
And the thing is, once government said in the budget that is going to have a budget deficit of 6.5, it means that the government, on net basis, government is going to add to the net debt stock. We have to understand it that way. Unless government says that, well, we are recording enough primary surplus, so our revenue is more than our expenditure. So we are using part of that revenue to pay our interest costs, so we are not going to borrow. In that sense, that is the only way when you are recording surplus. But so long as you are recording deficits, then we should understand that any time government says it's going to have a deficit, then there's that high tendency that government has to borrow.
Didn't government know this before? I mean, what are principles? I mean, you tell the Ghanaian people that you won't borrow. So what of principles? So you come and then you see you have to borrow. So were they not aware, they had to do that?
I'm not trying to speak for government, but it is the situation that is dictating the pace. That is what government did not.
Situation is dictating the pace.
Yes.
The previous government didn't have the same scenario. So the situation also depicted the pace at which they were borrowing.
No. How did we get there?
But doesn't it boil down to principles? Doesn't it boil down again to principles?
In 2012, the debt to GDP was 54%. 54% in 2012. Okay, and within that period of time, we increased it to about 73%. The rate at which you increase it annually is about 33 or 30-something percent. So you are just adding up without growing the base. There are 3 key things that determine your debt stock. The base, that is the rate at which you are growing, your fiscal deficits, and then your exchange rate. If you have a chunk of your funds locked up in foreign currency, then the
You are an economist.
Yeah.
Did you hear the government say that, this government saying they won't borrow? You heard that, didn't you?
No, I don't think they said they won't borrow. Because
sure?
every government... I would have been very surprised. Every government borrows. There's no government in the world, as we speak, that will say that, as for us, we are not borrowing. Even America, the richest country, still borrows. It is not just about the borrowing, it is all about the structure of the borrowing, the term structure, the cost of you borrowing, and the risk of you financing the borrowing. That is very important. That is what we talk about debt sustainability issues. Where you are using about a third of your expenditure in servicing debt, it is not sustainable. Where you are taking about 73% of your GDP, in debt.
So are you saying the trend is healthy?
So you have to find a way of bringing it up. But first of all, you need to close the gap. So once you say that you are going to record 6.5, that gap has to be financed by 2 ways. Either you say, okay, I'm going to print money to finance it, or I'm going to borrow. And borrowing, you either borrow domestically or externally to finance it.
So educate me, when you are printing money. So why don't you print a lot of money and share to everyone?
That is catastrophic.
Why is that?
No, you can't do that.
Really?
It's so easy.
You just said that.
No, it's so easy. That is the last thing that any government
wants to do. Why not print a lot of money and stop borrowing?
Yeah. So if you keep printing, then what happens? You keep printing, then it becomes just like the paper, that we have on the table, because we all print papers, isn't it? So if you just print, let's just print. So over time, the money becomes worthless.
I see, but the finance minister, he was quick to make comparison between the public, right?
Yeah.
Should I go on?
Yeah, go on.
Yes, he was quick to make a comparison between the public debt stock at the end of 2008, and that was about 9.5 billion when the NPP was leaving power to that of the NDC in 2016, to about 122.3 million Ghana cedis. Some have argued, considering the time and the value of money, is this comparison, do you think it's flawed, looking at the circumstances and the years?
Yeah, you know, I'm an economist. Okay, so I look at key indicators. What gives you the ability to borrow? The fiscal space is your base, your growth, your productive base. Okay, so anytime you're borrowing, you try to borrow to match the fiscal space. That means, that means that your capacity to repay the money, it is determined by the rate at which the economy is expanding. You get what I mean? So you're borrowing and keeping eye on your base so that at any given time you have enough base to repay the money. But if you keep borrowing without regard to the expansion, the base, you know, then you are creating risk for the economy, because when it comes to repayment, you will not be able to. If you are using all your production, like now, 73%, everything that is produced in this country, if the debtors say they want to take back their money, we are left with how much? 27% as a country. The rest goes into payment of debts. It's not good. You know, so you want to look at, in 2008, the 9-something billion. I don't look at the magnitude or the size of it, but in terms of it relation or the relativity of it, it's in amount in your GDP. How much is that worth in your GDP? So that was around 25%.
I mean,
yeah, so you compare.
Right.
Yeah, that's how you do the comparison. So if at that time it was 40% and now it's 73%, then what it means is that you are worse off today compared to that period of time. It's not so much about the magnitude. That is why I think overhead Dr. Baumia talking about, although the amount has increased by from 122 at the beginning of the year to 137 or thereabout. Magnitude, it has increased. But has the base increased? Yes. So you can see that the debt to GDP will be coming down. We can't be adding to our debt stock, but if the rate at which the economy is growing is faster, you realize that the debt to GDP will be coming down. So it may even come down to, say, 50%. Meanwhile, our debt stock is about 500 billion. There's no problem about that, because you have been able to grow the economy in such a way that you are only using just 50% of the size of the economy in servicing the debt. So what is important for this government is to making sure that we grow the base. As for borrowing, we can't. Your roads, schools, healthcare, energy, all of that needs critical investment, infrastructure, public investments. And you need to borrow to be able to do many of those things, other than letting it wait and to hurting the economy. So I am not against borrowing, but I'm against borrowing at high cost and at a very high risk. You know, so if the structure, the term structure is favorable, borrowing at minimum cost.
Yeah, and that's good for you.
Yeah, that's good for me.
Again, you've called for an establishment, you yourself, you call for an establishment of monitoring institutions that would enforce and track the performance of government instead of, relying on politicians. Yeah. You trust, or don't you trust, or are you saying that perhaps you don't trust the politicians, so, you want them to have a different task force?
Yeah, history is always there to guide us. How can we? Just last year, we had a president telling us that this election year, we are not going to overspend. We are going to keep to target of 5.3%. The IMF was there with a big whip. Yet, we ended up with about 9.7%. So how should anybody trust politicians? So you need institutions.
But which is, again, is it a fiscal council or a different one?
Yeah,
which one were you
that's
talking
the fiscal council.
That's the fiscal council.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Looking at the performance again of the current government so far, would you say that they are better managers of the economy than the previous government?
Well, it's difficult to tell. I don't want to pass that judgment now.
Why is that? 6 months. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so far so good. You know, it is clear, and it's about commitment to fiscal discipline. So, I mean, so far we have seen that this government is serious about fiscal discipline, fiscal prudency, fiscal transparency. And for me, I think that is the way forward. If they're going to keep to that and they're not going to give in to political pressures and the demands of interest groups, then I think.
But Eric, I have a problem with that. You are a technocrat. I can call you an economist too. So why is it difficult for you to be? I'm asking you again. Why can't
the structures of this economy have not changed that much, and that it determines a lot of things.
So are they better managers than the previous government, from what you've seen? I mean in August now.
It's too early to make that judgment. But from the indicator that I've seen, particularly one thing, that cutting expenditures when your revenue is not doing well is prudence.
So this government is doing better than the previous government.
Well, you want to say it that way, I think so.
Thank you very much, Eric. Eric Osei-Assibey is the senior lecturer in the economics department of the University of Ghana, and he's in our studio. I mean, I like to listen to him a lot. He's an economics expert. Thank you so much, sir, for having me. Right, let's keep the conversation. I'm thinking, do we print more notes? Do you think government should print more notes to take care of the economy and to pay all our debts? Let's have that conversation on all our social media platform, which is on your screen right now. You've been watching The Hard Truth. My name is Nana Akosia Kunira Santi Samuel. Have a repeat of the show tomorrow morning at 9 to 10 a.m. See you next week and have a good evening. Bye.